a notion that religion ought not to inform the values of a citizen.
That, after all, is a completely different thing than what we're talking about.
Well, but not different from what Playboy philosophy is engaged in making fun of every religious notion, however it is translated, whether through the laws or through the teachings of our venerable ancestors. Anybody who disagrees with you is just plain wrong. He's superstitious. He's purely tyrannical, one of your terms. And I'm asking you whether or not you agree with the proposition that whatever the agreements are between church and state, in point of fact, the so-called freedom of the church, as outlined and explained and defended even by people who desire to keep the church and state separate, Father Murray, for instance, quoted by you frequently as a case in point, that precisely that freedom of the church is to inform the people about the necessity to maintain certain values that conduce to a viable existence, and that you are engaged in breaking those values, at least as far as sexuality is concerned.
Needless to say, I have no reservation to the free exchange of various points of view relative to this or any other question, coming from religious quarters or any other. And it would be very easy for the viewers here perhaps to get the mistaken notion also that the basic things that Playboy puts forth are per se on one side of the disagreement here, and that the religious community is on the other side. This true is not true. This thing called a sexual revolution, which is really what we're talking about here, is something that is going on in both secular and religious community, and is something in which a great many more liberal members of the clergy are very deeply involved and concerned about. I think this search for a new ethical, set of moral values based on something other than simply rigid rules set forth many, many centuries ago is something from which only good can come.
I have no doubt that you are simultaneously in pursuit of good and a high circulation for Playboy magazine, and that you consider the two to be common goals. And I have no doubt either that today, as 1,000 years ago, you're going to find divines who are perfectly prepared to agree with you that we ought to have a completely, quote, sex-liberated society. I myself tend to be a little bit orthodox, at least as regards this. I understand the Christian tradition to be one that says merely because you have an appetite is not an excuse for giving in to it. And I understand the Playboy philosophy to be saying it is to lead to a kind of a neurotic repression to ask somebody to give it. Incidentally,
Freud said that.
Yeah.
Freud said that.
Well, no, he didn't say quite exactly that.
Well, see, one of the things I think that's very important.
In the first place, he was a very orthodox monogamist.
All right, I think that we're more apt to get...
What Freud said was understand what it is that you're doing to yourself.
We are more apt to get...
But he was not a latitudinarian as regards personal behavior.
We are more apt to get true monogamy, happy monogamy, something other than the sequential polygamy that we really have in society today. I think if we take a more realistic...
If I may say so, how in the hell do you know? How do you know?
Well, all you can do is base upon, it seems to me, the facts that exist as we know them today, which are considerably different than those that existed many centuries ago. We do have Freud. We do have some, as in many other areas of man's advancement, there have been significant technological advances just within the last few years. The pill, the scientific, though not the actual, solution to the problem of venereal disease, these two great bugaboos in the past that lent some seeming logic to the simple thou shalt nots, now technologically have been solved. We haven't been able to apply them socially yet, but it seems to me that it does begin to permit the opportunity of examining sex in a new concept that is not totally related to procreation and is not...
But isn't this analogous to saying that since the discovery of insurance policies, it's perfectly all right to rob?
No, I think it's comparable to saying
the principal fact of robbery is the deprivation, which deprivation no longer is meaningful if you have an insurance policy.
Do I understand you to say that you're relating sex to robbery? Is that what you're saying?
I am suggesting that there is a sanction both against, quote, illicit sex and robbery. Incidentally...
Illicit sex, after all, is only what we call illicit sex. I mean, is all premarital sex illicit sex?
And I suppose the question before the House is whether God also calls it illicit sex, assuming that you acknowledge its existence. But here is something that has always rather struck me as paradoxical in your behavior. Here is your magazine, in effect encouraging pre-sexual, premarital licentiousness, and as a matter of fact, postmarital licentiousness. But you give very, very strict orders to your bunnies in the Playboy clubs that they must under no circumstances consort sexually with their patrons. Now, why do you do this? Why mightn't this stultify them? Mightn't this inconvenience the patrons? Aren't you being a little bit inconsistent and being
very consistent, I think.
Rigid?
No, it's kind of a notion. You see, you suggest that what I really have is a kind of a view of society in which there are no rules, personal or otherwise. And of course, this is not the kind of thing that I have in mind at all. Any kind of freedom requires greater personal responsibility, but where the clubs are concerned, this is simply a matter of not feeling that it's necessary to mix sex and the commercial.
Oh, why not?
In other words, the clubs are there for a specific purpose, and that's the specific purpose.
Assuming it were legal to do so, would you set up a series of brothels around the country?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that...
in what way would this be inconsistent with the Playboy philosophy?
It wouldn't be inconsistent, it's just not my cup of tea.
Why? It's not profitable enough?
No, I just am motivated by other things, that's all.
No, but I really am interested in this because I take seriously the attempt to understand the Playboy philosophy. And I don't understand why, on the one hand, you should urge this kind of latitudinarianism, and on the other hand, in certain other aspects of your commercial life, be rather a martinet on the subject. I don't understand why you give one series of instructions to your readers and another to your bunnies in New York City and Chicago.
Well, we don't give any instructions to the bunnies in terms of their personal life. That's the point. In other words, this is not their personal life. This is a specific operation set there for a specific purpose, and has nothing to do with whatever
wait a minute, as I understand it, because I've read your code of behavior for the bunnies, and as I understand it, they are not permitted to go home with patrons even after they are off duty. Isn't that correct?
All that this requires, and really the motivation behind it, is really a protection for the girls themselves. It permits us to...
Protection against what?
Against against the infinite variety of ways that they would have to find to decline pleasantly if they wanted to decline pleasantly. That's the point. In other words, it simply separates the one from the other. And I see no inconsistency of any kind. To me, to be consistent the other way, it would mean that an analogy that I've used before, that Ziegfeld, because he put beautiful girls on a stage that were inviting and delightful as a part of his show, would be obliged to supply them with the orange drink during the intermission. I think that the two are, the one does not follow logically from the other.
Gentlemen, may we continue in just a moment? We would like to interrupt briefly.
Mr. Hefner, it seems to me that precisely what, quote, follows is directly in point. That is to say, if a careful reader of the Playboy philosophy emerges, as, for instance, I myself did on reading it, with the notion that there ought not to be any restraints on one's, quote, normal appetites, then precisely what follows is at what point does it all of a sudden become pertinent to suggest certain restraints? And it seems to me that you run into this difficulty with this paradoxical advice, as I said a moment ago, that you give on the one hand to your readers and on the other hand to your bunnies, who are in the position to gratify those restraints. Now, we see as recently as a couple of weeks ago a position that might be a part of your 100th installment of your Playboy philosophy. Here's an ad in the most distinguished literary weekly, or rather fortnightly, published in New York City for a book called A Bill of Rights for Erotic Liberation of the Sexually Different. And their point really being, I suppose, that there's no reason at all for you arbitrarily to decide what's normal and what's abnormal. In point of fact, you have gone rather far yourself in suggesting that which has from time to time been considered abnormal in sexual life really oughtn't to be so. It should be completely normal. So this Swedish doctor publishes a book in which he suggests that convenient provisions ought to be made for the